Thank you all. I'm so happy to be at BalCCon again after a very long time. And as you will see, my talk is somehow related to the fact that we couldn't have a real BalCCon for quite some time. Because today I would like to speak about human connections in a time of physical distancing. And of course, when I say physical distancing, the first thing that comes to mind are the conditions in a pandemic. But we know that the trends that originated even before the pandemic are here and will possibly continue even after COVID has become less of a problem. So obviously, this is not a tutorial and it's not a how-to lecture or even a presentation of original research. I will cite research by others, but my main intention is to start a discussion among ourselves. I'm sure that every one of you has their own experiences with regards to this matter. So, I think the main problem or issue that I want to present here can be summed up very concisely in this question. Why are we here? And to be more specific, why are we here and not at home streaming this event? We all know that virtual events are cheaper, they are more convenient, and you could also say they are more inclusive for people who are not able to travel for some kind of reason. So why are there still real-life events, even though we have the technological means to do everything online only? So to answer this question, I will start with some research. The US firm Pew Research has published statistics that show that indeed virtual meetings and chat and video calls have been extremely important for people during the pandemic. This has been true for 90% of US adults, and I think in other countries the numbers will be quite similar. At the same time, as you see here, 40% of US adults were complaining of the phenomenon known as Zoom fatigue. And here's another study with German adults in which the numbers were even higher. Almost 60% had experienced Zoom fatigue. And these numbers are only from 2020, so I would assume that after more than 2 years of pandemic, the numbers are even higher. So, what is Zoom fatigue? It's the generic term for the side effects of spending too much time in video calls. So it doesn't only refer to Zoom, but to any kind of video chat platform. And mainly it is a feeling of exhaustion and stress. And studies have shown that there are many causal factors for Zoom fatigue. Okay, I'm sorry, you probably can't read any of them, and they're in German anyway, so I will tell you. The most important factors that lead to Zoom fatigue is the fact that you lose all the non-verbal cues that you have in a physical interaction. That means you learn more about the other person's intentions and moods by watching them and watching the small movement of their faces and the exact tilt of their voices. And in a Zoom meeting, you only have an approximation of that, and a lot of information gets lost. And another problem that's related are bad audio quality and audio and video delays. You know this phenomenon when everyone talks at once, and then they notice, and then everyone stops talking. That's one example. So in summary, you have to concentrate more and listen harder in video meetings. But because you don't have to travel physically from one meeting place to another, they are often scheduled back to back, which means that you also have less time for small talk, for breaks, for recreation, for anything. So as a result, and I'm going back to the Pew study here again, only 17% of the US adults say that digital meetings for them are as good as in-person meetings. But still, we need some kind of solution for situations in which we can't meet in person. Otherwise, there are not only problems for businesses, but also an increase in what is known as lockdown loneliness. Here I'm citing a study that has looked at groups that are most at risk for lockdown loneliness. And it was specifically about conditions in the pandemic, but I would assume that these populations here, adults who are living on their own or who have health problems, and kind of surprisingly also young people, and of course old people, and minorities, all those populations, I would think that they are at increased risk for loneliness also outside of the pandemic conditions. And there are even pre-pandemic trends. For example, this one shown here, that lead to an increased risk. For example, in many countries, the number of single-person households is increasing. And there are other trends like demographic change, meaning that there's a higher proportion of old people in a country that contribute to the fact that there are large proportions of the population who are at higher risk of being alone. So for a time, I think people believed that social media could be the answer. There are a lot of studies on this matter. There are some varying results. Here's one example of a study that shows that real-life friends make people happier. That's a fact. And social media friends in this study have no certain effect on happiness, neither negative nor positive. But interestingly, frequent logging onto social media correlates with unhappiness. But we don't know cause and effect here. So it could be that frequent logons to social media make a person unhappy, or the other way around, that an unhappy person is more likely to often log on to social media. So of course, Facebook is kind of outdated anyway. There are always new social media and new ways of trying to create a feeling of digital connectedness. This example is mukbang, is a Korean trend, meaning that people meet on streaming channels to watch each other eat. The technical term is digital commensality. This may be a kind of very specific example, but it shows that people have a kind of deep-seated desire not to be alone, especially when doing something as important as eating. So all those different kinds of digital being together, they have one thing in common. People can't touch each other. And this may be important because social touch, meaning the kind of touch that you give each other during normal things in daily life. This kind of social touch, it influences the hormone levels in humans, for example, oxytocin. And these in turn have an influence on other physical processes. For example, if you have a lot of, or just a regular amount of social touch, this reduces the severity of pain, and not only of physical pain, but also of the pain that we feel when we are socially excluded. On a neuronal level, these two are quite similar. So, in my opinion, this lack of social touch during the pandemic may be one factor in explaining why some people were increasingly frightened and angry during the course of the pandemic. This is, of course, a political and a social problem, but it may also be a neuronal and a physical problem. And this again leads to the question whether it is possible for people to touch each other physically in a digital world. And at the present time, physical touch cannot be realistically recreated in virtual reality. But people are already working on it, and there have been experiments in which people were touched by tactile devices in VR. and they actually experience this like the presence of another human being. It's what they call in technical terms the feeling of co-presence, that someone is there with you. But physical touch is not the only factor important for our well-being. When you hear the word intimacy, maybe you automatically think of physical intimacy. But even years before the pandemic, it has been shown that meaningful intimacy can be created online, even without physical touch or VR touch. And with meaningful, I mean that it improves the mood and the well-being and therefore health of a person. And it has been shown, for example, in this study here, that there are two elements that are necessary for this kind of online intimacy. The first is self-disclosure, and the other one is social support. In other words, you share something about yourself, and in return, you receive positive feedback and social support from the other person. So actually, when you think about it, there were ways to do that even before we were digitally connected. And I will show you two examples that are having kind of a comeback in recent years. The first is writing real physical letters. And I'm sharing some of my own experiences here. And I'm showing you a few real and tangible things that people sent to me starting maybe 20 years ago, and that I kept all this time, and that have those connections have also led to in-person meetings that I think created lasting memories for all of us. And the other thing, another good example of going out and sharing something about yourself and the things that interest you with the world are zines, and they are also having a kind of comeback in recent years. They are self-made magazines that have been around since, I think, at least the 1980s, when photocopying became affordable for everyone. So I have put here a link on YouTube for any of you who are interested to watch a short introduction. But there are also problems, of course, with these ways of interacting with the distant world. One is you may simply not be interested in any of these things. So if your favorite mode of interaction with the world is to play sports with a large group of people, then these suggestions will not help you in any way. But another important problem is that this kind of interaction is kind of hard. It is slow, you have to wait for feedback from others, and not all of the materials may be readily available to you. So, what do you do when you wake up at night at 3 a.m. and you want to be entertained? Probably you will turn on any of the social media that are available to you. Maybe you would rather read a physical zine, but they cannot be obtained with the same immediacy as anything digital. And the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa called this the problem of uncontrollability. In simple words, he says that we have lost the will to wait for something that is slow or inconvenient and not available at the click of a button, even if the actual experience would be better than anything that is available on digital media right now. In other words, we want to control what is available to us at any point in time. And I think in particular, this is the mindset of Silicon Valley. They even want life itself to be available at their demand, as this quote from Peter Thiel shows. And I think this is an illusion. We also have to accept that the desire for human company sometimes cannot be satisfied immediately. But fortunately, now we are here at BalCCon, again, after a long time, where many new impressions and experiences are available to us that are not available at home. So I will end my short talk here and invite you to discuss freely after this talk, or maybe in the evening or during the other days, about what you think about this whole set of problems that we are faced with. So here are the scientific papers that are used, and if you want to do any further reading on this matter, then you can download the slides and look up the papers. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Hello. Have you been reading maybe The Brave New World from the Aldous Huxley?
I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I know it only from quotations and references, and I have never read it, no.
Well, I would like to really recommend you to try to find it. It is the book that is written before the 1984,
yeah,
and after the other book that is called We by a Russian author. I'm blocked my mind now, but that's not the point. The main thing about Brave New World is the separation from the human individuals, where children are actually conceived outside of the human bodies. They are raised, I mean, not raised, they're from embryo phase until the born. They are fed in, for instance, some sort of a jar. It's not relevant for the thing. And just not to make them all perfect, they are poisoned. So there are alphas, betas, gammas, delta, and epsilon. So alphas are not poisoned at all. They are targeted for the government and high positions. Betas are regular working people. Gammas are low working people. Deltas are people working the things that are bad, and gammas are working in mines and the things that no one would actually normally work. There are very interesting things about the culture being projected on them, but the main problem is that actually people are so separated that they don't have any not physical interaction, but they also don't have a sexual intercourse, and they are consuming it in a way that they use some kind of a virtual reality to have some sort of, and the idea of having a physical touch is quite repulsive in that society. And the thing is, and it's not concerned with the COVID, actually. I think that the thing is that in our society, although we all thrive to have physical contact, to have recognition from the real people, not some virtual friends from some Facebook or any other media. But at the same time, people are getting more and more afraid of the actual physical contact. For instance, in conferences like this, there are usually just islands of the people that already know each other, and rarely, and I see that as a progression, that even less and even less people are trying to communicate with the different people, usually being frightened by the different cultures, different ways of life, ideas. And in this unfortunate modern worlds, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, we are kind of rising in that fear from the different people, like immigrants, like different religion or things, and we are actually drawing ourselves more into some of the safe circles, and even in those safe circles, people are falling apart because, you know, when you hang out with someone for 20 years, you get some problems, and then your circle of friends is getting even smaller and smaller. So I would like just to suggest those ideas as opposing. I do understand, and we all actually, either living alone or living in some kind of a community, we all really strive to be recognized as a friends, as a humans, as a potential partners. But at the same time, I think that this virtual thing of social media networks, which basically didn't start with the internet, but that started with the television. When we substituted the hanging out with friends, we substituted for the sitcoms and movies. You know, when I don't know for Germany, but in Serbia, like in 70s or in 80s, there were like one channel or two channels, and after midnight there were no television at all until the 7 a.m. or something. So I would like if you can comment on this. This opposite things that is that we as a humans, we don't evolve that fast as we evolve intellectually. So intellectually we are growing fears from others. We are growing fears from touch, and even with this COVID thing, the touch is even more prohibited, like not only the social distance but the physical distance. We have the social distance long time ago, but we have now physical distance, which is almost like a desirable kind of a thing or behavior. And at the same time, while it is really happening, we are all feeling the pain because we are kind of social beings. I mean, our closest relatives, like primates or monkeys, they do live still the way that we don't. And the graph that you showed about the people who are living solitary, and we do have solitary animals like cats. Cats are solitary. They're not living in chunks like dogs. And we are also closer to the dogs because we do live in a kind of a tribes. So when I look at that graph, I saw that mostly northern people are mostly living solitary, and when you look at the bottom, like Portugal, Spain, Croatia, Greece, we are mostly living together with strong family ties. So I would just like if you can comment a bit about this thing that we are inside emotionally, we are striving to be in a company because we just feel that from our guts, we feel that. And at the same time, culture and things around us are driving us apart. And the thing that you said, that it is really a question, if you look at the Facebook, are lonely people more on the Facebook, or being on the Facebook makes them more lonelier because they kind of substitute their real need for the real touch. They said, okay, I have friends, I have social interaction, and that's good.
Yeah. That's a trend that I recognize very much, and I think maybe this fear of company I haven't really included in the talk, but yes, you're absolutely right. That's why I liked to read about Uncontrollability by Hartmut Rosa, because I think you mentioned that this process started with the TV, and then later there was the internet and social media, and what all of them have in common is that they provide the illusion of having company, but in a safe way, in a way that you can just decide to switch off, which you can't do with a real company. And real human company has a lot of advantages, but also disadvantages and risks. And once I think you stop dealing with those disadvantages, you start. You are not used to them anymore, and this is a process that gets worse and worse. Like when you have a little fear of something and you start avoiding it, the fear becomes bigger and bigger. And I think to stay healthy, not only in body but in mind also, you have to allow for uncontrolled experiences, for surprises and for things that you have not expected, because otherwise your bubble will become smaller and smaller, and I think that's not healthy in any way, because as organisms we need to be challenged all the time. If you avoid all kinds of surprises, then it will be for your mind like staying in bed all day is for your body, in my opinion. So that's a trend that you see in other parts of the human experience as well. For example, when we travel, we want everything to be controlled, and when a surprise happens, it's not a surprise. It means that the whole journey is a bad one. But I think with regard to human interaction, it's this problem of wanting controllability is the worst at the moment, yes. And I think you could have a whole new talk about that. So maybe I'll take it as a suggestion for next year. It's very interesting, and you could say and study a lot about it, and especially it's very important for all of us. Yeah.
Hello, I have a small question for you. I'm here. Hello.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
I see.
Thank you for your presentation. I had a small question because many things changed during the COVID and the physical isolation that we were forced. I'm from France, so we had a few, a few quarantines, the lockdowns that happened. Yeah, I'm looking for my words. Thank you. And I was wondering about adults and children going through training sessions or courses on Zoom or whatever video calling you're using. And I was wondering, I was thinking about two questions. The first one is there any study that that shows if it's as efficient as physical teaching in a school or in class? And the second one is attention span. That is to say, the time that you have to focus and the time afterward you need a break to be able to learn again. In schools you have 5 to 10 minutes break sometimes. And I was wondering if you have any insight on how to do our best, because it still happens today that we have remote training sessions or remote courses. Do you have any insight on this? Thank you.
I'll start with the second question. I will just talk about the question of children and teenagers, maybe. There are two aspects. The first is that children mostly learn by doing and not by watching. So this is obviously a problem, but the other problem that comes when you have teenagers or children at the verge of teenagers, it has also been shown that Zoom and other platforms, they negatively affect their self-image, because they are looking at themselves for hours, and they will notice not their flaws, but what they think are their own flaws. And then maybe they will compare themselves to Instagram photos or something, so that's also a problem. Can you just repeat the first question very shortly? We don't have a lot of time left, I'm sorry, but what...
Thank you. The first question was, are courses done remotely with video conferences tools? Are they as efficient as, but I think you've already a bit answered about this.
Yeah.
Are they as efficient as physical with the teacher inside the same room physically or remotely?
In case of adults, you mean? Yeah. Well, again, that question, it depends on what parameters you're looking for. So what is efficient anyway, and what population are you looking at? So I haven't read all the studies about this question, but I would imagine that depending on the research question, you would get very different results. For example, if you look at the problem of accessibility and inclusion, then I think you would see that people access online courses who are not able to access physical courses, so that's a plus for online, obviously. But the other thing is if there's anything that has to do with physical skills, it will not be as efficient. And then again, there comes this thing about Zoom fatigue, and also the factor that sometimes, even if you don't learn anything physical, it helps to walk around while learning, which is why some professors already suggested that it makes more sense to take a video call or a video course on your smartphone or tablet, so that you can actually walk around by taking the course, because that helps the learning process as well. Yeah.